To people who say you're taking time out of swing states to go do this, you say?
I say the following. You have been covering me for the last long time. I did yesterday 8 stops and 3 major speeches, and I've been doing this for weeks straight. I left there for an hour and a half. I'm going to North Carolina right now. Then I'm going to Florida. I'm going up to New Hampshire. For you to ask me that question is actually very insulting, because Hillary Clinton does 1 stop and then she goes home and sleeps. And yet you'll ask me that question. I think it's a very rude question, to be honest with you. And what I do is I want to back my children. My children work very hard, Ivanka in particular. And at the opening of the hotel, I want to back my children. Very important to me. So we had a ribbon cutting, which was very quick, and I stopped in D.C. But the real key to this is I want the American people to understand that this is under budget, ahead of schedule, and we need that for the United States.
And just so you know, I've been reporting on the fact that you're going to North Carolina for a couple of stops straight from here. But my next question is, there's a new poll in Florida that has you up a couple of points. Other swing states have you really in the hunt. Given that, are you prepared to write a check to help yourself get over the finish line? And if so, how big? And I'm talking about advertising.
Let me just tell you that I'll have over $100 million in the campaign. Hillary Clinton has nothing in the campaign. She's all special interests and donors, and they give her the money, and then she will do whatever they tell her to do. But I will have over $100 million in the campaign, and I'm prepared to go much more than that. Now, here's the question. New polls are coming out. We're leading Florida. We're doing great in North Carolina. We're doing great in Pennsylvania. We're doing great all over. We're doing really well in New Hampshire. Ohio, as you know, and Iowa are doing fantastically well. I'm telling you, CNN doesn't say it, but I think we're going to win.
So, but to do that, you have a pretty big bank account. You can, and time's running out. The clock's ticking. Okay. Will you write a check?
I've already written.
But I mean, specifically to get up on the air to combat the ads that you say Hillary Clinton is running against you.
Well, in Florida, she has 50-1 against me. 50. You were the one that reported.
But you have the means to combat that.
In the meantime, sure I do. But in the meantime, 50-1, and I'm leading. How would you like to have spent? You know, in the old days, you'd get credit. If you would spend less money and have victory, that would be a good thing. Today, they want you to spend money. I'll have over $100 million. I'm willing to spend much more than that if I have to. I'm seeing just great signs. You know, one of the other things we're seeing in Florida, we're seeing it in other places, the lines going into voting booths, going into voting areas are unbelievable. I mean, in Florida yesterday, we passed 4 of them. The lines were 3 and 4 blocks long. Those are not her voters, because her voters have no enthusiasm.
Can you just be specific? How much are you willing to put down in order to put up new ads?
I will have over $100 million in. I'm willing to invest more than that.
Like how much?
Just let's go for your next question, Dana.
All right, the election less than 2 weeks away now, and the candidates are focusing heavily on Florida, a battleground that is now a complete
Whoa, exactly.
Almost through the computer, almost smashed the set. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee. You were just demonstrating
what a toss-up looks like.
We get it. A brand new poll showing Donald Trump with a slight edge over Hillary Clinton in the Sunshine State. The margin is razor thin, but the numbers are what they are. Donald Trump is in Washington this hour for the opening of the Trump International Hotel. After spending 3 days barnstorming the state, Florida's 29 electoral votes are crucial to Mr. Trump's hopes for an upset victory come November 8th. Our senior national correspondent John Roberts was in Florida. Now he's with us live from the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. John?
Jenna, good morning to you. If it's Wednesday, it must be D.C. And Donald Trump about to take the stage here at the old post office to talk about his latest accomplishment, which he says, and the paintings up there say it, is under budget and ahead of schedule, using that really as an illustration for how he would govern the country if he is fortunate enough to win the election on November the 8th. A lot of people are saying, well, why is Donald Trump taking any time off the campaign trail to come here to Washington to open a hotel? I count about 40 cameras here today, Jenna, and that is more cameras than are typically at one of his campaign events. He did spend the last 3 days in Florida. A lot of that was to get out the vote because Florida began early voting on Monday. A 2-day tally that I made finds that Democrats are outpacing Republicans by about 30,000 votes, though it's impossible to know how any of those people have voted, but at least registered Democrats versus registered Republicans, Democrats in the lead by about 30,000. But the Trump campaign, happy with where it is right now, pointing out that a lot of Republican counties have not yet started early voting, and they will toward the end of the week. They also like the results of that new Bloomberg poll you briefly referenced at the top, which shows Donald Trump with a 2-point lead in the Sunshine State, 45-43. One of the big themes that Trump was going over on his 3-day swing through Florida was Obamacare and the looming fiasco now that the Obama administration acknowledges that enrollees in Obamacare will be facing premium hikes in the double digits, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25%. And Donald Trump yesterday in Tallahassee reminded people what Jonathan Gruber from MIT, considered the architect of the Obamacare bill, said about it when he was writing it. Listen to this.
He said they could pass Obamacare because the stupidity of the American voter. The stupidity. He called the American voter stupid. The only stupidity with the stupidity, and you know that, and it is the stupidity of our politicians who rammed this monster down our throats, and it's going to get worse, and Hillary Clinton wants to keep it.
Now, reports out today that the Donald Trump campaign is going to stop fundraising for the campaign and for the RNC. Not exactly true. Donald Trump will not headline any more big money fundraisers, but after this evening, Hillary Clinton won't be doing that anymore. But the Trump campaign will continue to raise money for the campaign and for the RNC. Donald Trump Jr. will be out there. Reince Priebus will be out there. Of course, they still have a very robust online fundraising capability as well. So it's not like they've stopped raising money. After he opens the old post office today, a little bit after noon, Janet, he'll be heading to Charlotte, where he'll give a policy speech. It's all about urban renewal and rebuilding. It's kind of the answer to what he's been saying so far about the inner cities, where he's saying, what have you got to lose? Vote for Donald Trump. Today, he will respond to his own challenge, saying, here's what you've got to gain. Jenna?
John, just a quick question for you. You mentioned that there's more cameras at this event today than what would be considered a regular campaign event. Do you have any idea why that is? Is it simply because it's Washington, D.C., there's more attention on the hotel? Is it because there's been more criticism of this event? What do you think that's all about?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's in Washington, D.C. There's also a large contingent of international journalists here as well that we typically don't see on the road with Donald Trump. Many of them are based here in Washington, so it's kind of just down Pennsylvania Avenue, very easy to get to, which I think explains a lot of that, Jenna.
We'll be watching. Sean, thank you very much.
So the tight race in Florida has Mrs. Clinton campaigning there this morning, kicking off a 2-day swing with an organizing event this hour. Donald Trump just spent 3 days in Florida. He'll be heading off to North Carolina this afternoon, where he trails Mrs. Clinton in the polls. So let's talk about it all with Josh Kraushaar, politics editor for the National Journal, Michael Warren, online editor for the Weekly Standard. Welcome to both of you. You'll probably both be happy when the next 2 weeks are over. Josh, so this new Bloomberg poll shows Donald Trump up by 2 points in Florida. What do you make of it?
It's certainly the best news the Trump campaign has gotten out of Florida, or frankly in any of these battleground states, in quite some time. And look, there's good news and bad news for Trump in Florida. On one hand, the polls show the race competitive and very close. But on the other hand, some of these early voting numbers are a little bit discouraging for Republicans, where Republicans held about a 5-point advantage in terms of these early ballots cast in the last presidential election. That margin is down to about 1 point as of now this year in this election. So.
Stop for just a second and tell viewers how that works, because your ballot, when you mail it in, doesn't say Democratic ballot, Republican ballot, does it?
That's right, John. It's registered Republicans versus registered Democrats. So what Trump campaign officials will say is that some of these older Democratic voters are actually voting for Trump. In fact, Trump is doing very well with seniors and a lot of voters in working class areas that traditionally voted Democratic. So we don't know exactly how these voters cast their ballots. But what Democrats are encouraged about is that their turnout machine, that their ground game is fairly strong in Florida. That's why Donald Trump was spending 3 days in the Sunshine State to try to get out the vote on the Republican side.
Michael, we all know the role that Florida played in the Bush versus Gore election in 2000. Is it a must-win state for Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, but it's not the only must-win. I mean, this is the problem that Donald Trump faces, is even if he is ahead and competitive in Florida, and even if he does win Florida, if you look at the Real Clear Politics average of polls and sort of divide up the states between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in terms of the leaners, and you're left with the toss-ups, Trump doesn't have to just win Florida. He also has to win North Carolina. He also has to win Nevada. He also has to win all of these other states, including states that generally vote Republican, like Arizona, Utah, Texas, where he's even in trouble there if you look at those poll averages. So he's really playing defense here. So, yes, Florida is must win, but it's not the only one, and that's a big problem.
So he's gone from Florida, Josh, to North Carolina. How do his prospects look there?
Well, North Carolina is also a state where the polls are closing, and there were 2 polls that showed the race within the margin of error. But again, this is actually an interesting state because you do have a very conservative base in both North Carolina and also Florida as well. So what Trump is trying to do in these final couple weeks is get the Republican base out, get conservative voters to show up. He's got a tough map no matter what happens, but if he can't get conservatives to show up and vote for him, he'll have a lot more problems with the big picture.
Well, and he says, Michael, that there is just this sort of undeclared well of Trump support out there that is going to put him over the top in some of these elections. I guess witness the claims about the ballots in Florida that are being mailed in.
Yeah, I mean, he can claim that. We haven't seen any evidence of that. And if you look at sort of the past numbers for people who have been registered to vote and haven't voted, all these sort of things, even if Trump were to get every single person who would generally vote Republican to vote this time around, it still wouldn't be enough in a lot of these swing states, particularly when you look at the higher turnout rates among Hispanic voters in places like Florida, like Arizona, like Colorado, where those voters, Hispanic voters, haven't really played a role in past elections as big as they may play this time around. And that's a group that's voting heavily Democratic. So Trump, I think, is counting on a big turnout from that base, but I think Hillary Clinton also has an advantage as well.
He's off the campaign trail today to open his new hotel in Washington, Josh. A lot of political observers have thrown up their hands and said, huge mistake. But as John Roberts pointed out, he's getting a lot of publicity there, getting 40 cameras in the room, and a lot of Americans are going to be paying attention, aren't they?
Yeah, he'll get a lot of free media attention, and that is a good thing for the Trump campaign. The more worrisome thing is the fact that while Trump is in D.C., his running mate Mike Pence is in Utah. These are not, D.C. and Utah are not swing states on the presidential map. I think a lot of Republican strategists would love to see Trump spending more time in Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, all the classic swing states when you only have 2 weeks left. But he certainly will have a chance to amplify his message, and a lot of people will be watching Trump today at the hotel.
One thing positive, I guess, about Florida for the Republican Party, Michael, is Marco Rubio's numbers and what that means for control of the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. And this is actually pretty consistent in polls of Florida. Marco Rubio actually running ahead of Donald Trump with respect to their Democratic opponents. And so, look, this is something where I think is a bit of a bright spot for Republicans. Florida, as well as Ohio, that swing state where Rob Portman, the Republican, is doing well. But it's also a problem if Trump can't turn out those voters. And if he's spending time in D.C. and not in those swing states working on Republican turnout, even those Republicans who are running ahead of Donald Trump are going to face a problem with depressed turnout. So they really need Republicans to come out to vote. And I think if I'm a Republican Senate candidate, I see this event in D.C. today, and I'm a little worried.
Michael Warren, Weekly Standard, Josh Kraushaar from the National Journal. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Well, right now in the battle to defeat ISIS, action near the front lines as Iraqi special forces move thousands of civilians from villages near Mosul as they work to recapture the Islamic State stronghold. This comes as Defense Secretary Ash Carter says coalition forces may soon expand a campaign to retake Mosul to include the ISIS capital of Raqqa inside Syria. Benjamin Hall is live in Erbil, Iraq with more. Benjamin?
Hi, Jenna. Well, today there was a real lull in the fighting as Iraqi troops sought to consolidate some of the gains that they've made over the last few days. You can see it, if you will, as the calm before the main assault on Mosul. Today, troops did begin massing nearer Mosul, bringing in reinforcements for that battle. But ahead of them, ISIS is said to also be preparing, with some media reporting that hundreds of fighters have been seen entering the city from the west wearing suicide vests, and that couldn't be independently verified. Today, Iraqi special forces also moved 1,000 people out from villages near the front lines. while at the same time ahead of them, ISIS are said to have grown increasingly brutal in the city as it seeks to eliminate potential threats from among the local population. And today we spent some time in the recently liberated town of Bartella. We saw some of the devastated churches there, but also some of their abandoned command centers. This is the oldest church in Iraq, and it was under ISIS control for over 2 years. You can see, just by looking around, the deliberate desecration of holy sites here. The altar has been burned, the crosses have been ripped off the walls, but this church is still standing. Many others have been razed to the ground.
Nearby, in another church, we found an ISIS command center. It was rigged with IEDs, and in one room, we found suicide belts and sniper rounds.
On the wall here you have a crudely drawn ISIS flag. This room was used for their meetings. Over here you can see the roster, where snipers had to go in the village and at what time. But most chillingly, if you look down here, you see a list of where those snipers should be aiming, the most vulnerable spots on the body. And the top three are eyes, nose and ears.
You know, fascinating to see how they organize themselves, but also very chilling to see the destruction they leave behind them. And of course, that makes you think, what's going to happen ahead in the battle for Mosul itself? Jenna?
Benjamin, thank you.
Well, former Congressman, I should say, Gary Condit is breaking his silence 15 years after he was linked to D.C. intern Chandra Levy and her unsolved murder. More on that ahead. Plus, as Donald Trump makes his closing arguments to the American people, why one prominent columnist is lamenting the loss of, quote, his former Republican Party. Right now, some crime stories we're following. In Oklahoma, officials say a woman serving a 25-year prison sentence for murdering her husband died in her cell from an apparent suicide by hanging. Prosecutors say Amber Hilberling shoved her spouse through a window of their high-rise apartment during an argument back in 2011. Former California Congressman Gary Condit breaks his silence 15 years after the death of former D.C. intern Chandra Levy, denying he had an affair with Levy and again saying he had nothing to do with her unsolved murder. And in Texas, Fort Worth police releasing new details about a middle school science teacher charged with capital murder. Witnesses say Kerry Heath was talking to two of his neighbors at a Halloween party over the weekend. He then went home to retrieve a rifle, returned, and allegedly shot both men to death. Heath is being held now on $1 million bond.
Well, as we hit the home stretch of the 2016 election, a column in the Wall Street Journal titled "My Former Republican Party is Worth Some Attention." Bret Stephens writes this, saying, quote, "I don't see the point of belonging to a party on the increasingly dubious assumption that it's slightly less bad than the opposition. If I can't get my grand old party back, I'd rather help build a new one." Joining me now, Bret Stephens, foreign affairs columnist for the Wall Street Journal. How is my impersonation of your? Is that not bad? Is not bad? Okay. How did you reach this conclusion?
Well, with a lot of misgiving and reluctance. But I kept thinking about where the Republican Party was just a few years ago, even when Mitt Romney was running for president, to say nothing of what it was when Ronald Reagan was president, and where it is today on immigration, on trade, on foreign policy, on a lot of issues that really matter to me. And it's a party I no longer recognize. When I was growing up, my parents used to say, we didn't leave the Democratic Party left us, with George McGovern and Jimmy Carter. And I more or less feel the same way now about the Republicans.
So at this moment, do you not consider yourself a Republican?
Well, I'm a registered Republican, and I'd like to see my old party back. I'd like, hopefully, after the election, I'd like to see the party be the party that stands for free trade, the party that understands the value of immigration for the United States, legal immigration for the United States, a party that understands the importance of a strong defense, and above all, a party that insists on civility and culture in its leaders, and that's not what we have now.
So as a registered Republican, who are you voting for?
Well, I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton, and I'm going to vote for Republicans down ballot, and I'm sure people are now currently throwing baseball bats through their TV screens.
Because it's one thing to say and be critical of your own party. It's another thing to say, well, I'm actually going to vote for the other party to be the leader of the free world.
Yeah, listen, I'm not enthusiastic about Hillary Clinton. I can't count the number of columns I've written that are critical of Mrs. Clinton, but I actually think Donald Trump is a danger to the Republic, and I think the only way the Republican Party finds its center finds its soul, finds its Reagan once again, is if it takes such a drubbing that it says to itself, we're never going to repeat that mistake of nominating someone with the ideas or the temperament of Donald Trump.
But do you think in that case you're putting your party and your qualms with your party over the country, being that you've been so critical of Hillary Clinton, especially when it comes to foreign policy, which is your expertise?
No, listen, as I said, I think Donald Trump is a danger to the Republic. And, look, God forbid we should take the man seriously when he says maybe he's not going to recognize the results of the election. At the end of the day, you have to take men at their word. That's why they're running for president. You can't vote for him on the assumption that he doesn't mean a word he says.
So another conservative columnist wrote a long piece just last week in the National Review, Victor Davis Hanson, and he was on our program, about basically towards a Republican like yourself. He says, I can't vote for Donald Trump. And foreign policy was one of the things that he focused on. And I just want to read a little bit of his article. He said, President Trump might shake up U.S. foreign policy in controversial and not always polite ways. In far calmer fashion, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton already has revolutionized America's role overseas, from the Iraq pullout to the foundations of the Iran deal, to lead from behind Libyan bombing, to tiptoeing around violent extremism and workplace violence, to empowering Chinese expansionism, to increasing distance from allies and proximity to enemies. Obama reminded us that approval from abroad is usually synonymous with thanks for weakening America and making us more like them than us. Now, I'm just wondering, that's a long list, Brett. Again, going back to your expertise of foreign policy, Hillary Clinton at the helm, you actually think we would be safer, even based on her record as mapped out in that piece, than a Donald Trump?
Yes, I do. Look, as I said, if you've been reading my column for the last 7.5 years, I don't think I've had nary a kind word to say about Obama, except perhaps when bin Laden was killed. And you're absolutely right. Hillary Clinton was by his side on many of those decisions, although in truth she was also quietly opposed to some of the steps that he took. But as I said, Donald Trump is a danger to the Republic. When you have a senior Republican like Newt Gingrich saying, we might not defend NATO, our treaty ally, in the event that Russia invades it, you're sending a signal throughout our entire alliance system that our guarantees are not good. What does that mean in South China? What does that mean for a country like Israel? What does that mean for our small and embattled democratic allies abroad? That's the reason why he terrifies me.
Brett? Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank you for sharing our vote. We'll talk more about this.
Sorry about your TV sets.
We'd love to have you more next week as we get closer to the election. And we'll be right. What do you think about Brett? Let us know. We'll be right back with more Happening Now. Right now, automaker Volkswagen is preparing to begin buying back cars involved in its emission cheating scandal. The company is accused of rigging diesel engine vehicles to underreport emissions, and the $14.7 billion settlement is the largest in American history. It means 475,000 owners of Beetles and Golfs and Jettas and Passats can sell their cars back or get them modified and get cash compensation up to $10,000.
Some new information now in the Clinton email scandal. The latest email drop by WikiLeaks reveals Mrs. Clinton's campaign was scrambling to, quote, clean it up after President Obama denied any knowledge of the secretary's private server. Fox Business Network's Peter Barnes joins us live from Washington with that. Peter.
Well, hey, John, new emails from WikiLeaks show early concern by Hillary Clinton's aides over her email setup when she was at the State Department. President Obama was asked about it in March last year by Bill Plant of CBS News, 5 days after the New York Times reported Clinton's use of private email. The president's response made Clinton aides uneasy. Her speechwriter, Josh Schwerin, emailed communications director Jen Palmieri, quote, Jen, you probably have more on this, but it looks like POTUS just said he found out HRC was using her personal email when he saw it in the news. That email was then forwarded to other top Clinton aides, including Cheryl Mills, who responded, quote, we need to clean this up. He has emails from her. They do not say state.gov. On the night of the initial Times story, Democratic operative Neera Tanden emailed campaign chair John Podesta in disbelief. Tanden wrote, why didn't they get this stuff out like 18 months ago? So crazy. Podesta responded, unbelievable. Tanden followed up with, I guess I know the answer. They wanted to get away with it. Yesterday, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest maintained that the president did not know Clinton was using a private server. John?
Wow. Peter Barnes in Washington. Peter, thank you.
Well, a multi-million-dollar mistake puts thousands of National Guard members on the hook for what the defense secretary just said about the enlistment bonus issue. We're live with that story. Plus, Donald Trump blasting Obamacare during his campaign for the White House, why it could be a real issue for the Democrats. A fair and balanced debate. Next.
Right now, a quick look at what's still to come this hour of Happening Now. A nurse facing murder charges as she stands accused of poisoning 8 patients, and investigators struggle to understand any motive. It's become a symbol of the migrant crisis in Europe, and today new action at a camp in France after migrants there set fire to their tents and shelters. Plus, Apple sells more iPhones than expected, but the tech company's bottom line is still hurting. What it plans to do now.
Well, breaking now on thousands of National Guard members ordered to repay their enlistment bonuses as the defense secretary weighs in with new orders and stops efforts to recover tens of millions of dollars and bonus money. For more on this story, Rich Edson's live in Washington. Rich?
Good morning, Jenna. And Defense Secretary Ash Carter has just announced the Pentagon will halt all government efforts to recover that bonus money. Carter explains many of these soldiers received bonuses and tuition money improperly because of errors, and he says because of some criminal behavior by some in the California National Guard. Administration officials, including Carter, have been addressing this issue for days as the government was sorting through these cases. Carter acknowledges this review process is taking too long.
Anybody who volunteers to serve in the armed forces of the United States deserves our gratitude and respect, period. I'm aware of the specific issue that you're speaking of. It's got its complexities to it, and we are going to look into it and resolve it.
Carter says the Pentagon will establish a new review process to ensure the government resolves these cases by July. In a statement, he says, quote, ultimately, we will provide for a process that puts as little burden as possible on any soldier who received an improper payment through no fault of his or her own. At the same time, it will respect our important obligation to the taxpayer. Congressional committee chairmen in the House and Senate say they are already investigating this, sending a letter to the California National Guard asking for all bonus and student loan repayment information since 2002. Senior House lawmakers are also promising a legislative fix on this issue. Though every seat in the House and a third of the Senate are up for election, that means lawmakers right now are out of D.C. in their districts and states campaigning. Jenna, back to you.
Rich, thank you.
America's election headquarters and the skyrocketing premiums for Obamacare. They could turn into a real vulnerability for Democrats as Donald Trump seizes on the issue on the campaign trail.
Repealing Obamacare and stopping Hillary's health care takeover is one of the single most important reasons that we must win on November 8th.
Joining us now for a little debate, Simon Rosenberg, president and founder of NDN and former Bill Clinton campaign advisor, and Morgan Ortagus, national co-chair of Maverick PAC and a former financial intelligence analyst for the Treasury Department. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Good to be here. Simon, as a loyal Democrat, are you worried that Obamacare is going to become a millstone for Democrats running? I mean, some of these premium announcements are coming out right before the election.
I think it's an issue, and I think we're going to have to address it. I mean, I think the particularly big problem is we just don't have a lot of time to rebut some of the more the exaggerated charges that we're going to hear. Let's be clear about what happened and what was announced, right? We're talking about 1.5 million to 2 million people who get their health insurance through the exchanges will see these galloping costs in their, hurt their own pocketbook. This is not affecting a bigger pool of people than that. And on balance, right, I think we can defend Obamacare. We've eliminated pre-existing conditions, lifetime caps. More than 20 million people have gotten insurance through Obamacare, and healthcare costs in general, which is a big contributor to the deficit, have slowed down and the growth of. So we can defend it over time, but I I think, yes, there's an opportunity for the Republicans in this short window to make some gains in the next few weeks.
All right, Morgan, your response to some of Simon's points.
Well, good luck defending it. I think that this is a game changer, actually, for Republicans in tough Senate races, tough House races over the next 13 days. You know, it's easy to say what you've done with Obamacare, but go to the small business owner who can't hire more employees because they're worried about raising the number of employees they have to afford Obamacare. Go to the people whose premiums have risen. There's a reason why these insurers are dropping out of the marketplace. When you see the big guys leave the Obamacare marketplace, or when you see the premiums rising 25%, they're leaving, or the premiums are rising because costs are rising and the system doesn't work. We can go back to the inception of Obamacare, where the president jammed this through a Democrat-controlled Congress, and I don't think that they should be so surprised that Republicans aren't willing to lift a finger for a program that they find inherently flawed and bad for the American economy and bad for the small business owner.
If we are getting to the point where just one insurer is available to so many of these people, I mean, how do you fix that, Simon? It's not like you can go to Aetna or United Healthcare and say, hey, come back, well, let's try this again.
Yeah, look, there's no question that, in my mind, right, that on balance, Obamacare has been a success, right? This is a part of because Obamacare is much more than about the individual exchanges. It's eliminating pre-existing conditions. There's a lot that was in this, right? But this part of Obamacare is going to have to be fixed by the next Congress. It's an opportunity, frankly, for the two parties to work together to make sure that millions of Americans have a better health care system. Repealing it and replacing it is not an option. It will deny tens of millions of people who have insurance today, who've acquired it in the last few years. It will strip it from them. The Republicans are going to have to come to terms that their job now is to work with the Democrats to fix the system that's in place. And I think this is a great opportunity for Hillary Clinton and Paul Ryan to come together to work on something out of the box early next year.
Morgan, do you see that prospect? I mean, Obamacare, I don't think, got a single Republican vote when it was passed.
No, because there was no bipartisan consensus in trying to pass it in the first place. We have to see, of course, what happens in this.
I would like to promise and pledge to all of my voters and supporters and to all of the people of the United States that I will totally accept the results of this great and historic presidential election if I win. If Al Gore or George Bush had agreed 3 weeks before the election to concede the results and waive their right to a legal challenge or a recount, then there would be no Supreme Court case and no Gore versus Bush or Bush versus Gore. And there have been numerous other cases. In effect, I'm being asked to waive centuries of legal precedent designed to protect the voters. They say when you do this kind of an event, you always start out with a self-deprecating joke. Some people think this would be tough for me, but the truth is... The truth is I'm actually a modest person, very modest. It's true. In fact, many people tell me that modesty is perhaps my best quality. Even better than my temperament. You know, Cardinal Dolan and I have some things in common. For instance, we both run impressive properties on Fifth Avenue. Of course, his is much more impressive than mine. That's because I built mine with my own beautifully formed hands. While his was built with the hands of God, and nobody can compete with God. Is that correct? Nobody, right? That's right. Every woman lied when they came forward to hurt my campaign. Total fabrication. The events never happened. Never. All of these liars will be sued after the election is over.
But a simple phone call placed to the biggest newspapers or television networks gets them wall-to-wall coverage with virtually no fact-checking whatsoever. Here is why this is relevant to you. If they can fight somebody like me, who has unlimited resources to fight back, just look at what they can do to you, your jobs, your security, your education, your health care, the violation of religious liberty, the theft of your Second Amendment, the loss of your factories, your homes, and much more. Look at what they've done to you with your jobs.